Last week when I was doing my top 10 lists, I happened to mention one of my favorite comics, which was The Man of Steel. I won't spoil it to where I put it on the list, but it should be interesting that this is like the third time I've mentioned this on my show. And this is like my third episode. So let's get the title card out of the way. So why do I bring this up? Well, it's because I fully enjoy this comic, The Man of Steel. Now, its story is not original. In fact, at the time I was reading it, which was 1986 or 1987, the Superman, the character, was over 50 years old. Actually, he was about 50 years old, and several things about him had changed over the years. In fact, 10 years after the first Superman story, the original authors rewrote the story of how Clark and Lois first met. Yeah, they created a Superboy. And Superboy, he had this super dog. Oh yeah, later on, when Superboy was Superman, he had a cousin named Supergirl. And Supergirl, she had this super horse. Oh, she also had a super cat. Okay, so it got pretty ridiculous. And comics were trying to get a little mature, and DC Comics, the publisher for Superman, they wanted to try something different. So they decided to reboot Superman. It's a really great shot in the arm. John Byrne took over as artist and writer. John Byrne was a pretty popular comics writer even by that time, and it didn't really last that long. And I think Superman's origin was probably rewritten again, and I'm not even talking about the big thing that DC Comics did when they started the New 52, where they relaunched all their titles and relaunched their entire universe. And of course, this comic series still continues, and not even within the continuity that was established in the Superman Christopher Reeve movies, that Lois and Clark Superman show from the 90s, the show Smallville from the 2000s, the DC Cinematic Universe. It's pretty clear that Superman of the comics and TVs and movies will be with us to be rebooted and redone and sequelized and prequelized until the end of time. Superman belongs to DC Comics, which I believe the parent company is Warner Brothers. Superman will be whatever he needs to be, or whatever they want him to be, or whatever we want him to be. At this point, we are drowning in a sea of unoriginality, and Superman is just simply one example of intellectual property that is just being changed and rebooted, retooled for whatever purpose it can be used for. Of course, Superman isn't the only example of this. We keep seeing Batman and Spider-Man movies. And superheroes aren't the only thing. We just keep seeing these rebooted intellectual properties of Transformers, Mickey Mouse, the Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, and the list goes on. Granted, these are intellectual properties that are targeted for children, and it kind of just makes sense to keep rebooting these. However, think about all the shows that have been rebooted that were originally targeted for perhaps an adult audience. I mean, now we're getting Fuller House, that 90s show, all these shows that have started one place and just decide like, oh, we're going to pick up where we left off. And then we're seeing all these shows that have had remakes like Magnum P.I., MacGyver, Hawaii Five-0, the list goes on. In fact, it goes on so much, I don't really even see a need to give you any more examples. Basically, if something was a thing, it's just going to have to always be a thing, right? I mean, it's easy to see why this is happening. I mean, if you do this film, TV show, book, comic, whatever, you want to see the continuation of it. You don't really want the story to end. This is the same type of mentality that will greenlight sequels. Sequels date back, at least movie-wise, to 1916, and even then, in these older times, serials and other kind of documented type of films kept audiences coming back with a continuation of the story. Now, a big change happened in 1974 when The Godfather Part 2 won Best Picture. That is pretty much the only time a sequel and its predecessor have won in that category. This is not to say that the Oscars are giving us the best pictures that are out there. I'll discuss more in the Oscars a little later. Anyway, this opened the door to sequels to films that were popular at the time. Films like, say, The French Connection and Jaws, Rocky, all had to have sequels now. You know, and of course the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie, which gave us Superman 2, which is a pretty good sequel. Then we got Superman 3. And then Superman 4. I could probably talk at length about how many bad sequels have been produced over the years. Sequels that were just made to make money because the original just happened to be somewhat decent. I mean, this was in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and so on. But at this point, if I say any more, I'm just going to be adding to the conversation that has already been had several times on the internet and several other forums. There's just really no point going on. Several people are saying that originality is dead. Do you really need me to say it also? I want to address the idea that actually that this era of sequels has produced some very good things. Okay, so you might remember when Back to the Future 2 and 3 came out. I thought these were pretty decent. They may not be as good as the original, but they were a very decent thing, and they made kind of the original 3 films one continuous, decent story. It was projects like these that probably gave rise to this idea of doing movies in a series. Like when New Line did Lord of the Rings, filming all 3 films at once, that was a big risk. What if the first film hadn't worked? You'd have just this one terrible movie and 2 films just waiting to be just bombs. And of course we need to talk about the Marvel series, the most expensive television show ever made. Not just one movie, but I think by the time we got up to Infinity War and Endgame, I think there were 18 of these things. And yeah, it just keeps going, doesn't it? I will have to say we're seeing diminishing returns, but for the most part, this whole Marvel Cinematic Universe that Disney owns is making them billions. Okay, sequels may seem a safe bet, but we all know it's not completely safe. There's always an inherent risk. We all know about the DC Cinematic Universe. Certain films just didn't really work, and as a result, the whole thing just kind of collapsed in itself, and now they're restructuring. And then there was the utter failure of the Universal Monsters Dark Universe, where starting with the film The Mummy, the Tom Cruise version, they wanted to introduce all the Universal monsters into this connected universe. Would have been an interesting idea. That is the issue with movie series and sequels. If one film is not a winner, then the entire film and the entire film series ends up being a complete loser. Sort of like that one film series, Divergent. I can't remember the second one, but I think the last one was called Allegiant Part 1. They didn't make enough money to have a Part 2, and as to this time, there is no plans to make a Part 2 in this series. So the entire series is absolutely going to be unfinished. Then there's this thing where it's like a movie will be a hit, and of course they'll make a sequel, but then the sequel will be so bad it almost tarnishes the feelings that you get for the original. A good example of this is Men in Black 2. Every time I watch the original Men in Black, which I really like, I feel it's somehow poisoned by the fact that Men in Black 2 exists, and Men in Black 3 wasn't all that good either, as same with Men in Black International. The whole thing is kind of out of whack. I mean, maybe you can just treasure that original first Men in Black, but I have to admit, Men in Black had actually an animated series, which I'm told was somewhat good. If anything, this should have worked as a movie series. Men in Black should have been that. So why are sequels so bad? I'm going to discuss 5 reasons why bad sequels get made. They're not the only 5. They're by no means the only reasons. Number 1, introducing elements that really should have appeared in the original. Here's an example. In the movie Pirates of the Caribbean 3 at World's End, we're introduced to this concept of the Brethren Court. These 8 or so pirates who get together and apparently have got together and have been doing this for quite a while. Not only that, Jack Sparrow, who has been revealed to be this bungler, is one of these ruling pirate classes, which is very inconsistent with the rest of what we know about Jack in the film. Now, this could have been fixed very easily in the first Pirates movie. They mentioned the pirates Morgan and Bartholomew, so this idea that there was some big pirate code and stuff like that. However, there was an entire Pirates 2, Dead Man's Chest, where they never mentioned the Brethren Court at all. They could have easily brought up some of these subjects that could have been easily, have been satisfied in the third movie, but they never did, and I believe they actually filmed the Pirates 2 and 3 at the same time. To me, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen. Here's another example. In Transformers 2, Revenge of the Fallen, we're introduced to this villain named the Fallen, who apparently has been on Earth before. I remember watching this film and just saying, you're too late in the ballgame to reveal a villain of this magnitude like this. It just didn't really make any sense. It's just there so we can have a sequel. Number 2, characters just revert to their old ways. Boy, I keep using Men in Black 2 as bad examples, don't I? In the film, Agent J has to solve a case where he has to bring back his old partner, K. And the moment K, played by Tommy Lee Jones, comes back, Will Smith J somehow reverts to being this kind of sidekick who feels like a noob once again. It doesn't, they don't really play off each other very well. I feel like this is just bad writing as far as the script is concerned. Another example is Finding Dory, where we see Marlin again, and he's nervous about traveling. Didn't he get over his fear of traveling in the first one? I guess not. He also gets really angry at Dory, and it feels out of character because he's been living with Dory for several years, right? Number 3, side characters who are introduced in the first film have nothing to do in the sequel. A good example of this is Despicable Me 3, where Gru meets his twin brother, and then I think they have to fight a villain together or something like that. That's really all you need for this movie to work, and that part kind of does, but when you get to his adopted daughters and his new wife, they just have something going on with them, and I think in the film, his wife, oh gosh, I can't remember her name, she wants to be called Mommy. That's her plot. I think Gru's daughter wants to see a unicorn, and then the minions are doing their own antics. It's just a bunch of subplots kind of thrown in there that just don't really work. Number 4, the same plot occurs. I call these sequels a Xerox script because, honestly, it feels like that's what it is. Ghostbusters 2, which had a bit more depth thematically than its original, could probably write on that, dealt with this idea that New York City is being attacked by ghosts, and there's one giant ghost who's sort of controlling them. It's the exact same plot as the first one. They have a let's get the band back together kind of thing, and Bill Murray's character has to get back together with Sigourney Weaver, but it's the same type of relationship, almost the same thing that happens. And, of course, I have to bring back Men in Black 2, which has a villain who's a plant instead of a bug. Pretty much the same thing. So, yeah. Number 5. They can't get the original actors from the original, so they have to do some awkward workaround. One of the worst examples I've seen in this was Miss Congeniality 2, where they couldn't get Benjamin Bratt's character back. I think Sandra Bullock breaks up with him over a phone call, out of all things. They also couldn't get Michael Caine back, so they brought in Dietrich Bader. And I can tell there's a script that exists where he's supposed to be that character. It just makes sense. Another bad example of this was the film Blues Brothers 2000, which actually came out in 1999, I believe. Or maybe even 1998. But I should probably have checked on the date. But here, they couldn't get John Belushi because he's been dead for a while, so they had to get John Goodman, and they tried to expand the cast, and this is just a time where it's just like trying to do too much, and it just didn't work at all. So yeah, it's really easy to make a bad sequel, isn't it? Hey, you can do it without even trying, and you kind of feel like they probably didn't. But the thing is, in spite of bad sequels, they often make back their budget and beyond. It just makes sense to keep on making them. Now, I've heard this scary statistic, and I'm not even sure that if it's true, but like 90% of all projects that film and TV are working on right now are based in some kind of already established intellectual property, or they have some big name attached to them. I really hope that that's not true, but hey, even if it was, well, at least 10% of originality is still alive and kicking. Okay, I mentioned before I was going to talk about the Oscars, and I'm going to talk about this year, 2023. There are 10 nominations this year, and of those 10 nominations, 2 of them were sequels. Those sequels were Avatar 2, The Way of Water, and Top Gun Maverick. Now, I could probably do an entire episode about why Top Gun Maverick worked and why it was considered Oscar-worthy, and I kind of agree with this decision. I don't think it should have won. It is a film that is one of those sequels that's made like way too late after its original thing peaked so many years ago, and it follows a lot of the film cliches in most films. Now, Avatar 2 is a sequel that obviously is promising a bigger storyline. However, I didn't really think it was honestly that good, and maybe I'm not really invested in this thing, and maybe I have to see the entire Avatar series before James Cameron kicks it. But enough about those 2. Let's talk about 2 who aren't really sequels, but they are based on something that is, I guess, an existing intellectual property. That would be, of course, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is based on a book. Then there was, of course, Elvis, based, of course, on, well, Elvis. Okay, then we get to films like The Banshees of Inisherin, which was, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but that's an original film. As is Tar. Tar is an original film as well. Also, the film Women Talking is an original film. Ditto the film Triangle of Sadness. And the winner was Everything Everywhere All at Once, also an original film, and all of these 6 films that I've mentioned before have screenplays that were written by the directors. So these are films that were always meant to be films and are based on completely original material. Not bad. So does this disprove this theory that we're just totally addicted to sequels and franchises and reboots? Well, if we were to take the Oscars as, say, the best films or the best representation of box office receipts, I would say no, because a lot of the general public actually, I'm pretty sure a lot of the general public didn't even know about a lot of these films. And this is because a lot of these films didn't exactly, they weren't exactly popularized. It just kind of went under the radar for most of the mass viewers that view movies. Okay, I'm going to shift gears and talk about one of my favorite directors, Steven Spielberg. I forgot to mention that, yes, one of his films, The Fabelmans, was actually in the Oscar running last year. Now, this is a film that was written by Spielberg, but it was also written in conjunction with Pulitzer Prize-winning author Tony Kushner. I'm going to be very honest, my appraisal of this film is I thought that this was a film that was least worthy to be nominated for the Oscar. But hey, I am not here to badmouth Steven Spielberg. If anything, this is going to be high praise. And you're going to hear a lot of praise here, so just bear with me. Then again, can anyone discredit Steven Spielberg? The man is one of the, he's what you think of when you think of a film director, okay? He has had a incredible track record of success. And, and he's probably the most mainstream of directors that you could probably think of. And yet, here's the thing. When we talk about Spielberg, we never really talk about this diversity of his work. And I think we really should address this. And I think it's strange that in the film, The Fabelmans, that Spielberg wrote, it shows that Spielberg started out as a copycat. Yes, within the film, Spielberg's parents take him to see a movie, and he's scared at first. And he sees this train crash in this film from the 1950s called The Greatest Show on Earth. And then it shows Spielberg trying to replicate this train crash with a model train and his camera, his video camera. And then from there, it shows Spielberg making films like these horror films where he's pulling out his sister's teeth using some crude effects, making mummies using toilet paper, doing these war films with these strange kind of explosion effects. Honestly, the film ends when Spielberg meets his filmmaking idol, I guess, John Ford, who's oddly enough played by David Lynch, who's also a big film director. Yeah, that's just weird casting right there. Yeah, sadly, The Fabelmans ends when it's just getting interesting, where Steven Spielberg starts his film career. This is actually the stuff I wanted to see in the film. Spielberg's early film career was directing episodes of television for shows like Night Gallery and Columbo. He did this made-for-TV movie called Duel, which was about a guy who's essentially being chased on the road by a semi-truck driver for reasons unknown, and I don't even think we even get to see the semi-truck driver in the film. It's actually quite a decent film, and I've watched it, and it shows his talents. After that, there's this film called The Sugarland Express, which I had never even heard of. I just discovered it just by doing some research here. Of course, what made Spielberg the big household name was when he did Jaws, this monster movie that was kind of... It's nothing. Monster movies were, of course, done before. His take on it was rather interesting, and it was really the first blockbuster. It's probably the reasons why we have summer blockbusters. Yeah, that film made a lot of money. It was the biggest film of its time. Jaws was. A while later, he got this budget to do a film called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was a sci-fi film that came out in 1977 alongside another sci-fi film of the type called Star Wars. Now, Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out actually after Star Wars. It was Lucas who actually thought that that was going to be a bigger hit. That's strange, isn't it? Okay, so from here, Spielberg starts to almost kind of create this new genre of film, kind of essentially suburban magic realism. He did E.T., where the boy meets this alien. He was the executive producer of films like Poltergeist and Back to the Future. And there was an anthology show he did called Amazing Stories, which had almost pretty much was Spielberg the series. It was all these stories that had this kind of magic realism kind of thing that to take place in a believable sort of thing. Very unique show, actually. I probably should have talked about it when I talked about TV shows last week. So in addition to all these kind of fantasy, modern sort of things that Spielberg was doing, he was doing these giant action films as well, like the Indiana Jones movies. Pretty much the first four are all him. And then Spielberg would turn around and he would do these just very dramatic products, like The Color Purple or Empire of the Sun. These very deeply dramatic films. I think it's strange that in the same year, Steven Spielberg did the film Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. These films are, one of them is like this huge popcorn film, and the other is one of the, such a great drama. In other words, he was capable of doing these mainstream hits, well, in some cases not so hits. There were films like 1941 and Hook, which were considered box office failures. But my point is that he would do these incredibly great, just human dramas, such as Saving Private Ryan or Amistad. So yeah, Spielberg was not without his setbacks. Like Johnny Carson said, they can't all be gems. The best part was that these setbacks never weighed down Spielberg that long. He was willing to be experimental, and sometimes this paid off and sometimes it didn't. There was that film he did called AI, which was essentially Pinocchio in the future. Now, I have really no problem with that idea of this thing. The thing that I think the fact that he was trying to work with Stanley Kubrick to sort of make this happen, and then Kubrick passed away. The thing that I never really liked about this film is that in AI, the story of Pinocchio actually exists in universe in it. And to me, I'm going like, you really shouldn't do that. But sometimes you gotta break the rules, and sometimes you gotta take risks. Sometimes they pay off. And one film that I thought was especially a risk was Minority Report. Even though Tom Cruise was a star, the way the film is shot and this kind of washed out sort of look to it, this dystopian future. I believe this film is a lot deeper than a lot of people give it credit for. But still a risk, but it paid off for him. One thing that I just never really liked is the fact that he did direct War of the Worlds. It was a film that I just felt like any filmmaker would probably want their hands on. Not only that, the aspect of an alien invasion has been really done to death. The fact that War of the Worlds was the first to even do this actually kind of makes it worse. But at least Spielberg was kind of giving it sort of this look to it that after 9/11, I think that this film really started to have a more serious tone than, say, a lot of the popcorn-style alien invasion flicks that we were used to, like, say, with Independence Day. And there were always these films that came out that he would do that were more lighthearted in tone, like Catch Me If You Can, or The Terminal, or heavy-handed, like Munich, Bridge of Spies, The Post, Lincoln. And there was stuff that Spielberg worked on that was in existing properties that had been done before, like The Adventures of Tintin, one of his first animated films, I guess. And then War Horse, which I don't think I ever even saw that one. West Side Story I did see, and honestly, I guess I didn't think this film needed to be remade, and I definitely didn't think Spielberg needed to remake it. But now that I've seen the remake, I actually do enjoy it, and I have to admit, maybe it does need to be redone after, it's been like 60 years? I think after 60 years, I think you have a right to remake something, maybe. So that's a lot of films that Spielberg put out. And what do they have in common? Nothing. Seriously, all these movies, they are different in tone, genre, story, everything. Much of it is so different, and nobody talks about how diverse this repertoire is. And they all came from the same person. And the thing is, Spielberg could have done anything. I actually heard that Spielberg was offered projects like Spider-Man and Harry Potter, and he turned them down. And honestly, I think that's pretty wise. Spielberg could have done the same old, same old. He could have been doing that sort of magic realism sort of film. Something like J.J. Abrams tried to imitate in the film Super 8. And there was a time where I'm willing to forgive him from. There's a film called Ready Player One. This is a film that's just full of 80s nostalgia that, honestly, I didn't feel like Steven Spielberg should direct that, because a lot of the 80s nostalgia that we have is based on what Steven Spielberg did. So I kind of felt like, I don't know, this is, it just doesn't feel right. It would be like, say, I don't know, a great artist teaching, entering a kindergarten art class. It's just like, it's not right. Also, Ready Player One has this fad I'm starting to see in these sort of films where they just throw a lot of intellectual property in your face. In this case, it was Warner Brothers. I'm willing to forgive Spielberg for this one because this film is pretty ambitious, and it does sort of bring in a lot of it's pretty much an animated film. But on the whole, I have to admit, I wasn't really impressed by this one. Yeah, Spielberg has had his share of bombs, setbacks, mistakes, and it's, he hasn't gone by the blockbuster movie formula all the time, but he could have. I think it's interesting that the next Indiana Jones movie he is not directing. Makes me a little bit skeptical about it, though. You see a lot of directors, they have a certain commonalities to them. Hitchcock produced all those thrillers that we know him for. Roland Emmerich produces those stupid disaster movies. And M. Night Shyamalan produces those kind of Twilight Zone things. David Lynch, who I mentioned before, has his own trademark style. Does Spielberg have a style? Oh yeah, he does. I mean, there's just certain things, like the way music is used, the way shots are done in his films. I have to admit, there are things that are like that. But the important thing is, every film he did was so different. Okay, he had some that were kind of, that you could kind of easily relate one to another. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., yeah, okay, they have aliens in them, yeah. You get it. The thing I'm trying to say is he didn't settle, and I like that idea. We shouldn't have to settle either. These days, we have subscriptions to all these content streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and so on. There is so much content there, we can't even possibly view it in our lifetime. And yet, most of us don't take the time to seek something new, something we've never heard of, to try something different. I always felt like the greatest crime in these sequels and franchises and reboots is I always felt like because we're putting out just same old, there's some original idea that is getting shelved in order to make room for it. The truth is that these supposed superfluous ideas that we're seeing on the screen now are actually giving budget for more original ideas in the future. And also, we're making more and more stuff, so that does give more leeway for newer ideas to come here. You're watching this video on YouTube, and that isn't even a major streaming service. This is just some guy on YouTube talking about Spielberg and Superman. So yeah, originality still exists, and oftentimes it comes in weird forms. Remember back in 1999 when The Matrix first came out? A lot of people praised that as being this great, grandiose, original film. And I guess the reason why I think Warner Brothers even greenlit is because they wanted something to compete with the fact that Star Wars Episode 1 was going to come out that year, and that was expected to be this big old hit. Well, we all know what happened to that. The question I want to discuss is whether The Matrix is original. Well, yes and no. It has definitely a distinct style to it that I think is all its own. For some reason, I think green a lot. But also, it has older concepts like this concept of the Chosen One essentially shows up, which was brought up in Star Wars The Phantom Menace. There's a lot of martial arts and a lot of things that are taken from anime as science fiction and other dystopian kind of things that have been around long before The Matrix had. Well, like it says in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. Like any recipe, there's a finite amount of ingredients you can use, but what you can use from that, you can make quite a bit. I'm not talking about infinity, but it's a big, big number. But there's only so many chord progressions you can use in songs, and many songs do sound alike. The truth is that actual originality is hard, okay? It is. I mentioned in my first episode that I used to write sketches for a college group, and it was just easier to come up with a parody of some existing movie or television show or some sort of concept that has been done before. It was just easy to do that. To really come up with something original, oftentimes those ideas would come when I wasn't looking for them. I'd be doing my job and suddenly I just would have this great idea. It just happens like that. This is the magic of creativity. It's not something we should harness and control. So as far as these reboots, remakes, sequels, prequels go, if you don't like them, just don't watch them. If all of us did that, then the industry just wouldn't invest in them anymore. It would be that simple. Maybe one day we'll have a world where that actually happens. I really don't see that happening in the near future because as a culture we're just keep more and more embracing the familiar. I mean, I knew someone who saw the Lion King live-action adaptation twice in the theater. That's just crazy to me. This film made $1 billion. Surely, I hope that Disney is using that money to pay the bills on some more original films and not just investing in more Star Wars and Marvel properties, or worse, more live-action adaptations. Yeah, it bothers me that these live-action adaptations exist, as well as other bad remakes. I don't want it to bother me anymore. And I think a lot of people are bothered by them. And I remember when I saw M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, and I left the film thinking that, honestly, I paid to see money for something that I had really already seen in the first season of Avatar The Last Airbender. Now, most people consider M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender one of the worst films of all time. But I've seen people who have seen The Last Airbender, who have never seen Avatar The Last Airbender, and they think it's pretty decent. Maybe we should live in a world where it's okay to have two different versions of the same story. I realize that we look at The Wizard of Oz from 1939, the musical one, and we often think it's the definitive version of this movie, but truth be told, I mean, it was a book before that, and it seems like every high school puts on a production of it, which is a little bit different there. If you want to prefer one over the other, go ahead, if you can do that, or you can like them both and just for that reason. I recently watched Illumination's version of The Lorax. It's a film that I hated because I thought it differed from the original book and the original half-hour animation that they did for it in its tone as well as its story. However, I still like something in the Illumination version that I thought was pretty decent. And yeah, there are some things from each of the versions still held true. The original core and spirit of the work is kind of just like Superman, man. I mean, they keep redoing it, but there's still some core things that he's always there. He's always a last survivor from Krypton. He always lands in Smallville. He gets adopted by the Kents. He always fights Lex Luthor. Does he need a super dog? Well, it depends on who's writing him that week or month or whatever. Yeah, I grew up reading and watching Superman, still inspired by him, even though there's really no definitive version of him. Does there have to be? I mean, he's imaginary. We're going to keep imagining stories about Superman until we can't imagine stories about him. We as human beings are creators. It's more than just Steven Spielberg who make these things that inspire us. And yes, Steven Spielberg took shortcuts and had his shortcomings. Here's the deal. If we want originality, we need to seek it. If we're not satisfied with that, we need to write it. And the important thing to know is there's billions of us on the planet, each of us capable of being a Steven Spielberg and more. It's the creative ability that really makes us Superman. And just like the Man of Steel, we gotta use that power for good. So let's just keep using it. Don't worry about all these stupid reboots and whatever and stuff like that. But don't consider it a waste product as well. Okay, I'm done with my little speech about the power of creativity, as well as my view on reboots and sequels and franchises. Yeah, as you can see, I tried to get outside with this. You might have noticed I was in a park originally, and then I had to move while they were mowing it. And I don't know how I did with this one, but I just thought I'd get a little diversity going in. Diversity maybe isn't the right word. I think variety is the right word. Speaking of variety, I want to talk about next week. I'm going to talk about creative works I have done, stuff that is out there that honestly hasn't really gotten a lot of views. I'm not doing it just to advertise my own work, because after I talk about the works I have done, I'm not talking about the books, I've already discussed those. You can watch the first episode for that. I'm also going to talk about abandoned works that I started and never finished. I'm talking from when I was a kid to when I was an adult. Anyway, this has been Mark Rollins from the Geek Church, and I'm signing off.